The Curly Howard mystery finally solved, and it's bad. In the next minutes, we will peel back the laughs and follow a thread that runs from a crowded Brooklyn apartment to blinding sound stages and sleepless hotel rooms. From roaring crowds to waiting rooms. From headline triumphs to quiet pleas that never made the papers. You will hear how a shaved head became a crown, how kindness became a habit, how a body said no while the schedule kept saying yes, and why the final answer to Curly's mystery does not soothe, it sharpens, asking us to carry the joy he gave, and the lessons he paid for at the same time. Curly Howard was born Jerome Lester Horwitz on October 22, 1903 in Brooklyn, New York, raised in a working-class Jewish family where noise meant love and love meant you. Learned to speak up or get drowned out, and for a long time the louder voices in the room belonged to his older brothers Mo and Shemp. He was quieter, softer around the edges, the kind of kid who spent more time observing than insisting. He watched the room the way a future comedian does without knowing it, taking inventory of how adults change when they laugh, how a pause can loosen a frown, how a stumble can break tension better than a speech. The moment he had an audience, the temperature changed, shyness slipped, and something bright took its place, a quicksilver wit that lived in his eyes before it landed in his hands and feet. He could turn awkwardness into charm, hesitation into a bit, and he learned without a teacher how to let timing do the heavy lifting. Off stage he was modest and even bashful. On stage he seemed to inhale permission, transforming into a living cartoon without losing his human core. There was no conservatory, no method, just repetition and instinct, neighborhood stages and odd jobs that let him test what made people lean forward and what made them roar. He discovered that a look could land faster than a line, that a half second of stillness could double a laugh, that playfulness is strongest when it feels like discovery. And by the time the right door opened, he had built a toolbox that looked nothing like technique on paper and everything like mastery in practice. The way a glance could reset a room, the way a breath could stretch a laugh until it snapped in joy. He learned to trust that if his whole body believed the joke, the audience would believe it too. And under all that motion there was a gentleness that never left his face, proof that the character was a magnified truth, not a mask. Before he ever wore the suit of a stooge, he was testing his edges in small theaters and rough vaudeville houses. Cheap hours where sweat counted more than polish, and the price of a bad bit was rent unpaid. He learned how a glance can land like a punchline, and how silence can stretch a laugh until it snaps in the best way. The rooms taught him to aim low and wide, to throw a gag that a balcony can read and a child can feel. They taught him to keep the heart visible even when the bit got wild, and to trust that if he committed with his whole body, the audience would meet him halfway. Everything he needed later was born there. The pratfalls, the doomed bravado, the childlike mischief that made him indestructible and oddly fragile at once. He listened to laughter like a mechanic listens to an engine, adjusting a beat here, a pause there until the whole thing hummed, and after the curtain he would walk the blocks home replaying the night, promising himself to tighten a gesture or soften a reaction, to keep one surprise and retire another. He learned to read a crowd the way a sailor reads a sky. He learned how to save a sinking bit with an extra blink or a well-placed grunt. And most of all, he learned that love sits under comedy when you play the fool without malice, when the fall hurts you but never the other guy. When he officially joined the act in 1932, the trio was shifting shape. Shemp had stepped away to work solo, and Mo needed a spark that did not copy what came before. Curly still had a full head of wavy auburn hair and a mustache, a look that read more lounge act than demolition derby. Ted Healy and Mo pushed him to shave it down to skin, a simple change that turned into an identity. The bare scalp, the open face, the way the light caught his expressions as if they had been underlined. Out of that look came the voice, high-pitched and elastic, and the phrases that stuck to kids' tongues like candy, nyuk-nyuk-nyuk, certainly, woo-woo-woo, sounds first and words second, syllables that behaved like props. He made language physical and made the physical feel like language. The audiences answered with the only currency that matters in comedy. They kept coming back to see what he would do next, how far he would go before the world snapped him back like a rubber band. The chemistry within the trio hardened into something you could count on. Mo's command, Larry's bewildered pivot, Curly's irresistible escalation, a triangle that could spin any which way and still land on its feet. They practiced like dancers and brawled like brothers. They learned to hand beats to each other and grab them back, to time a slap so clean it looked dangerous and felt safe, to cue a fall with a breath and catch a partner with a fingertip. It was rough grace, and it worked, because they trusted the person underneath the bit. At Columbia Pictures between 1934 and 1946, the shorts came like a drum roll, nearly 100 in that window, and more than a handful turned into canon. Punch Drunks in 1934 with its perfect collision of boxing and musical trigger. Disorder in the Court in 1936, a courtroom that never had a chance. A Plumbing We Will Go in 1940 with logic leaking from every pipe. From the outside, the form looked simple: setup, escalation, catastrophe, retreat. Inside those beats, the craft lived in microscopic moves. The angle of a look, the breath before a scream. The way Curly's innocence made every mess feel accidental even when his hands were covered in the blueprints. He was often the center of gravity, the person the camera trusted to tell the truth of the chaos. A child's curiosity trapped in an adult's body, harmless until wonder broke the furniture, and in that contradiction he became the heart of the trio. The difference between slapstick you admire and slapstick you love. Directors and crews knew to give him room, to keep the lens open for an extra heartbeat because something unplanned might show up. An eye flick, an unexpected squeal, a double take so clean it felt like animation. He could sell a pie better with an eyebrow than most could with a throw. He could walk into a frame and make it look like the frame had been waiting for him all day. Away from cameras, the story turned messier and more human. His first marriage came and went so quickly it felt like an anecdote more than a chapter. 5 months of trying to fit a tender person into grown-up expectations while a career was still gathering speed. The divorce ended the attempt but not the longing. That longing ran under the choices that followed. On June 7, 1937, timed to the wedding anniversary of Mo and Helen, he married Elaine. For a while it looked like the thing he had been reaching for. Their daughter Marilyn was born in 1938, and with her came a new layer of purpose. But work that demands your body and your calendar rarely leaves your living room untouched. The travel, the hours, the attention from strangers who love a character and forget the man. Differences hardened into distance, and by June 1940 the marriage ended. He stayed in contact with his child, but the separation was a blow he carried in his face, even when he pretended to be indestructible on screen. Friends would say the laughter he gave away so easily became harder to keep for himself. He tried to patch the holes with late-night kindness and big daytime promises. He tried to be two men at once. The hurricane on screen and the harbor at home, and the effort frayed him. Health trouble had been nibbling at the edges, and now it began to bite. Weight that rose in spurts, the thud of fatigue that sleep could not erase, the kind of high blood pressure that writes its intentions into your temples, all of it aggravated by a life built on motion and adrenaline. The jolt of a laugh is a gorgeous thing in a theater, but what it takes from a body day after day is not visible from the cheap seats. During World War II, the grind grew sharper, with film production pausing for stretches. The trio filled gaps with live work for service members, long strings of travel and multiple shows a day, barracks to bases, small stages and big rooms, gratitude in every handshake and exhaustion in every hotel doorway. Mo kept the rules tight because he had to. No drinking on duty, no sloppiness in the one thing they could control. Curly, a professional to his bones, followed the line while the lights were on, but when they went dark, he went looking for numbness where he could find it. Food, alcohol, company that felt like comfort until morning turned it into noise. Then the cycle began again. He paid for applause with bruises and aches he hid under a grin. He paid for quiet with habits that made the next day harder. And somewhere in there the warning taps began on the frame. Short spells of fog, headaches that rang. A breath too short after a bit that used to be easy. Taps too easy to ignore. When a contract tells you to keep moving, money behaved like a revolving door. Generous checks that left as quickly as they arrived. Dinners that looked like celebrations and tabs that looked like warnings. Jewelry for the people who made him feel less alone. Gifts for those who might anchor him. Impulse property buys that felt like stability in the moment and drag later. Close calls with bankruptcy that kept resetting the stakes. Each time he got close to the edge, Mo stepped in as a brother first and a manager second. Budgets scribbled on paper. Tax returns assembled, one careful line at a time. A hand on the shoulder that said, "We can fix this, but you have to let me help." Beneath the gags and the sound effects there was a family spine, and without it the act might have bent until it broke. Curly never learned to like money as a thing to be kept. He liked it as proof that he could give, that he could say yes and watch a face light up, that generosity made him easy to love and easy to misread. So Mo did the unglamorous work of guardrails, kept the lights on and the door to later years unlocked, kept bills current and tempers cool. A quiet labor that never makes the poster and always saves the day. Animals, dogs especially, found the softest parts of him and made a home. On the road he would spot the strays before anyone else, the ones with hopeful eyes and ribs like parentheses. He would share food and attention as if those were the only currencies worth anything. He adopted when he could, ferried a few from town to town until he could place them somewhere safe, turned hotel rooms into temporary kennels and backstage corners into quiet shelters. At home, the pack grew into a chorus of wagging greetings that met him at the door. In a life ruled by schedules and applause, their needs were simple and non-negotiable. A leash, a bowl, a walk, a hand behind the ear. Through them you could see the gentler man. The camera rarely had time to show. The one who liked quiet morning light and evenings that smelled like soap and stew. People remembered that if you asked him about a bit, he would smile. If you asked him about a dog, he would soften, listing names as if they were family, because to him they were, and when he laughed with them, it was the unperformed kind. The kind that does not take anything out of you to give. Mo, seeing the toll in real time, kept hoping a steady partner might be the anchor his brother needed. Out of that hope, Curly rushed into a whirlwind. He married Marion after 2 weeks on October 17th. Often for a moment it looked like a script turning toward calm. But the reality unraveled fast. Arguments that echoed, priorities in collision, trust wearing thin, 9 months of trying and failing in public. The divorce turned private ache into headlines. Coverage imposed a caricature where a person should have been. Erratic, unstable. Words that stick even when they are not the whole picture. And while the lawyers did their work, his body sent a message no one could ignore. 2 months before the decree in the late spring of learning how to help without taking dignity. How to laugh with him without asking him to perform. How to measure progress in inches instead of miles. Even after that blow, he kept reaching for ordinary happiness with both hands. He married Valerie Newman on July 31, 1947. And for the first time, there was a kind of quiet in the house. A rhythm that did not depend on applause. In 1948, their daughter Janie arrived, and with her a reason to stack days in order. Valerie stayed through appointments and rehabs. The days that looked like progress, and the days that looked like surrender. A partner who measured love by the hours you show up, not the words you say. In that steadiness, he found whatever peace was left for him to find. Not the blaze of peak years, the tapering of a candle cared for by someone who refused to let the room go dark. The laughter that once came like a flood returned in ripples, small moments at the kitchen table, gentle silliness with a child who did not need a legend, only a dad. There were good afternoons and heavy mornings. There were cards from fans and quiet nods from neighbors. And there was the sense that being present in small ways can feel like a win when big wins are no longer on the board. For fans who only knew the giddy chaos and the spinning routines, the later chapters felt like a conflict they could not square. How does a man who seemed indestructible on screen live a life so vulnerable off it? For years, the fog around that question stayed put. A mix of studio silence, misreported fragments, the old habit of protecting the product even if it meant failing the person. As private papers and family notes surfaced, and as people felt freer to tell what they had seen, the shape of his struggle came into focus. Off camera, he was sensitive and surprisingly insecure about how he looked and where he fit. Even as the most popular Stooge, he could feel small inside success. Behaviors that colleagues and columnists chalked up to pressure, disappearances, mood shifts, jagged edges, read differently through a modern lens. The possibility of an undiagnosed mood disorder, aggravated by self-medication with alcohol, an attempt to sand the spikes inside with a remedy that only sharpened them later. Lay that understanding over the timeline, and the picture makes a complicated kind of sense. Not an excuse, a context. The difference between blaming a person and recognizing the limits of an era that did not know what to do with pain except hide it and hustle past it. The work at Columbia did not slow when it should have. The system around him was built to keep the machine running. He suffered the massive stroke in 1946 while filming Half-Wit's Holiday, and the narrative at the time treated it like a bolt from the blue, a single bad day. The breadcrumb trail suggests warning shots before the canon, transient spells missed or dismissed. Notes from the period point to a got-to-get-one-more-picture mentality, to keeping up appearances, to letting the public see only what made money and none of what demanded care. Mo advocated for him and pushed back where he could. There are ceilings you hit when a contract values the schedule more than the signer. In that gap between what he needed and what the studio would give, the outcome became harder to outrun. After that day, the trio adjusted without fanfare, a quiet handoff that kept a brand alive while a person who built it faded from the frame. That is the part that hurts the most. The way momentum can turn compassion into an afterthought, unless someone insists on stopping the clock and turning down the lights. After the stroke, he tried to be part of the thing that defined him. A small cameo in Hold That Lion in 1947, a wave from a passing train. Then the long fade into facilities and family homes, rooms that smelled like alcohol wipes and waiting. more strokes that took and took, until the face that once moved like rubber and light carried years like stone. When he died in January 1952 at 48, the notices went out. They did not rise to meet the size of what he had given. For a time it felt like the world folded his laughter back into a drawer without stopping to say thank you out loud. Later generations found him again. Through reruns and compilations, kids who had never seen a movie palace laughed at the same eye flicks and double takes their grandparents loved. The rediscovery felt like a long-delayed ovation, and as family recollections and overlooked files came forward, the picture humanized, not to scold but to complete. You could finally see the whole arc: the boy, the phenomenon, the patient, the father, the friend, the artist who kept showing up long after the body began to argue with the work. When people say the mystery is solved, they do not mean a villain in a mask got unmasked. They mean the pieces finally sit on the table in a way that makes sense. A sensitive person with a gift, a business that rewarded the gift while ignoring the person, a culture with no language for mental health except shame, a body that asked for rest and got more work, a spirit that kept trying to love and be loved in the narrow places fame leaves. It does not deliver comfort in the way we sometimes want. It asks us to let the laughter and the truth stand next to each other without canceling either, to honor the joy he gave while learning from the costs he paid, to keep the reruns close and the lessons closer, to notice when someone's sparkle is doing the labor of hiding their hurt, and to step in sooner with care instead of applause. So here is the balance worth holding. Curly Howard's legacy is the sound of a room laughing together at things too ridiculous to explain. The way a face can move like springs and still feel honest. The way chaos turns musical when played by someone who understands rhythm down to his bones. Right beside that sits the reminder to take care of the people who make us feel light. To see the person even when the persona is louder. To build systems that pause for health, that measure success not only in tickets and hours shot but in the care that allows talent to last. If we do that, then the story of his decline becomes more than grief. It becomes a guide. The next generation inherits not only the laughs but the safety net that keeps those laughs coming, without costing a life in slow motion. He made a generation giggle, and another one after that. He taught grandchildren what their grandparents laughed at, and found a way to jump the gap. The reels still land because the human under the gag never disappears. The best tribute we can give is to keep the work in circulation, and keep the lessons in mind. To say his name with appreciation and his life with respect. To refuse to flatten him into the caricature he so expertly pretended to be. He was a brilliant performer and a vulnerable man, a brother and a father, a colleague people leaned on, and a friend people worried about. He was all of it. That fullness is the real answer at the end of this long question. Hold the laughter in one hand, the truth in the other. Let both teach us to be kinder the next time. A bright soul steps into the light for our sake. If you want more careful storytelling about the legends behind the laughter, follow and subscribe. Share this episode with someone who grew up on the Stooges, or someone who just discovered them. And keep the conversation going so the work and the wisdom travel together.